Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our very exciting event today. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to the Vera Events team for supporting us with this event. So our aim today is to think about how can we reimagine coaching and mentoring with the aim then to continue to develop and support initial teacher trainees, early careers teachers and beyond. And we are hoping to use today as an opportunity to, first of all, reflect on our learning during lockdown, and then of course also thinking about ways of reimagining how we're going to support colleagues moving forward during the post-lockdown period and also moving into a new normal. So for us, this is a fantastic opportunity to think about our previous learning, our current learning, and then also future research opportunities that we want to explore. And I want to thank our wonderful presenters today who are giving up their Saturday morning to share with us their thoughts, their reflections, and also their learning on their learning journey as they are now supporting new teachers to develop and also current teachers to continue to become the teachers and they would like to be and the best version of themselves to move on to support the learners in their care. So we're really fortunate today. We have a fantastic lineup and we're really excited to introduce you to each one of these wonderful speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Professor Rachel Lofthouse, who is going to talk to you about creating professional legacy through mentoring. And I know that you are going to enjoy every minute of her conversation with you. Please feel free to complete the polls and the questions, and I will also make sure that those are then presented to speakers as we move through the morning. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel, and I know she has got an awful lot in store for you. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Lizana. I'm hoping that I've been muted by the central team, not muted, unmuted, and my video's on. And it's lovely to be here, actually. Saturday morning, we often wake up with that sense of a week well worked and hopefully a sense of a weekend to be lived. And it's really fantastic that people do give up just a bit of time to think about things that matter, not just to them, but to many other people. So I'm Professor Rachel Lofthouse. I work currently at Leeds Beckett University, and prior to that, for 17 years, I worked at Newcastle University, and prior to that, for 10 years, I was a secondary teacher. And throughout that period of time, I can remember people, individuals who made a significant difference. And those individuals have created the professional that I am, and now the academic that I am. And I think that's really what I want to focus on, that sense that we create each other in our profession. So this is the focus. It's going to be a broad opening keynote as opposed to one which digs specifically into any specific research projects. But I hope it's a good framing opener for the other contributions for today, which I think will provide you with some genuine insights into the practicalities of developing mentoring during this time, leading on from really excellent work that's gone on before, and the hopes that we have for the future. So as I said, I do remember mentors, and I would like at this point to shout out to Gordon and Dave. And Gordon and Dave were my mentors in two different and very different placement schools during my own PGCE year. They live with me. Comments that they made, conversations that we had still live with me 30 years later, because they were live and alive teachers. They were the people who I wanted to emulate. They were role models, but they were also extraordinarily passionate and enthusiastic about their subjects, in my case, geography, and perhaps even more importantly, about their school as a community for learners and for impact in the towns and the cities in which those schools were situated. So there was a genuine sense when I worked with them that we weren't simply worrying about tomorrow's lesson, although tomorrow's lesson mattered. We were thinking in a much more holistic and sustainable way about why my development as a teacher mattered. And I really do respect them as mentors. And those were in the very early days when partnership was first imagined in initial teacher education, where we had those formal management agreements in each university that was providing teacher education with its group of schools, that was framed around the emerging conditions and requirements for partnership. And since then, that is back in 1990, we've gone through many iterations of partnership. We've seen many new versions of teacher education. We have an absolute complex landscape of provision. So much so that every now and again people say we must simplify this, because although we have so many routes into teaching, nobody actually seems to know where to start. And of course we have all the churn, the political churn, we have huge changes in structure and governance in school. But even if we forget the wider landscape and just focus on mentoring, we've gone through many ideas, ideals and structures in terms of how we create mentoring relationships, how mentoring happens, what standards the mentors are supporting student teachers or trainee teachers to reach, how those early career standards do or don't align with future professional standards. We have standards for mentors. We have so many structures, so many schemes. And of course, we have the early career framework with its offer of mentoring now wedded into our national landscape. I do think, however, that we can look back at all of that and recognise that new structures, new schemes, new systems are not ever enough. They can help us frame our work, but they don't necessarily give us a genuine sense of what mentoring can do within our profession, because too often they're short-term, they're undermined, or they're thwarted. And that's not because individuals within the system are not putting their all into making them work. So structures and systems and schemes, not always enough. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. You'd probably be pleased to know I only have 3 slides, so I won't have to say that too often. Having joined Leeds Beckett University, I've been extraordinarily fortunate to be in a position to establish a research and practice centre. And this is not me trying to promote overly promote it, but just to centre my work, just to give a sense of what I'm doing now. So Collective Ed is the Centre for Coaching, Mentoring and Professional Learning. And if you want to know more about that centre, there's a web link there. But what I'd also suggest to you is that we are really enthused and passionate about drawing people into community together. So if you're interested in coaching, mentoring, professional learning, and you want to be part of a growing network of fellows and associates who are working in this field, please feel free to have a look at the work we're doing. However, that's not the most important thing today. So can we move on to the next slide, please? And this is my only other slide. So you can relax, you can look at it, you can think about it as I just talk through some of the ideas on here. So this idea that mentoring creates a professional legacy, I think, is one that is really central to our purpose moving forwards. It's not to dismiss the role of coaching, by no means. It's not to dismiss the role of others within an education landscape, supporting student teachers, trainee teachers, early career teachers, career changers, people who are moving into new roles in the school. But it is to recognise the real power and potential of mentoring in creating the profession that we want and need and deserve into the future. And when I think about mentoring, I think about it now as having this grand narrative. But I'm also aware that grand narratives need to be scrutinised, they need to be thought through, they need to be put into action, they need to be carefully considered, because otherwise they just become rhetoric. So it's very easy, I think, for us to jump on a new scheme like the early career framework and be very pleased about the fact that mentoring has been included within that scheme, and to celebrate that as if the fact that there's a scheme and a celebration of mentoring up front and a kind of acknowledgement of how important it is will do the job. What I really want to say is I think we have to change our beliefs, or we have to be stronger and more advocates for our beliefs about mentoring. Because if we actually hold on to some truths about why mentoring matters and how it works well, then it helps us identify those cases where it actually isn't working so well and where we need to make amends. And I might be talking about an individual, or I might be talking about a scheme. And it's not because we are looking to hold people to account in a way which is undermining their ability to do better next, because we know that our education systems are complex and hugely demanding. But it is about holding that hope and that truth about what mentoring might really contribute to our profession as we move forward. So these are some of the things that I believe mentoring can create in terms of the professional legacy. And I'm going to talk to each one briefly. They're not things that you can easily pick out of a list and cost and work out how much would it require in terms of resource or in terms of time in order for that to be ticked off. This is not about creating another checklist to hold people to account by. This is about sharing and understanding a belief about what mentoring adds, the added value of mentoring, and not just what it adds at the time that we experience it, but which it contributes long into teachers' professional lives. And I thought of something this morning which I want to end with, but I am a bit scared that I'll forget to end with it. So I think I'm going to say it out loud now. What I would love to imagine is really possible is that we build a future profession in which we don't simply say we have this many teachers in this many schools doing this amount of work, but that we say our teachers identify as teachers and mentors. They may not have an official title or role or responsibility as mentor, but to be a teacher is also to be a mentor. Because without the teachers taking real kind of grasp of this, without recognizing that what they do in an environment in which new teachers occupy the same space, in which colleagues need support, because we all do at many times in our career, an environment in which the way that we work makes a huge difference to the way in which others can work and develop. That's why I believe that we need to be saying we are teachers and mentors, and the mentoring is on behalf of others in our profession. So I may remember to say that again, but I'm quite pleased I've said it out loud now. It doesn't seem terribly mind-blowing, but I think it probably matters. Okay, so what do I mean by this grand narrative? How do I start to unpick it and make sense of it? Well, I think it's hard to argue that any of the items on this bubble diagram would not be beneficial outcomes, desirable outcomes of mentoring. But they can get lost in the bureaucracy of mentoring. One can trump another when we get into the day job. And actually, we probably need to keep all of them balanced in order to do our mentoring well. And as teacher educators, when we're thinking about the support that we offer to the mentors who work in our provision, who support and do so much of the legwork in our provision, it's worth bearing in mind how we support them to achieve these sorts of goals. So at whatever stage of our teaching career we're at, there is always scope to enhance our expertise. And that applies to a teacher on their very first day in placement, just as it does to a head teacher with 5 years of leadership behind her. There's always scope to enhance expertise. And what we mean by that is that we become more knowledgeable, we become more informed, we build a greater, wider repertoire of practice, and that actually we are entitled to seek support to do that. So mentors are part of the ways in which teachers at all career stages enhance their expertise. And sometimes we do that. When I say we, now I'm thinking if I was a mentor, we do that at the same time as we are learning the necessary expertise. So if we think about the last 6 months, teachers have been thrust into so many different roles, teaching in so many different ways, taking on different responsibilities for learners and for each other, that at times we've been catching up with the expertise we need. So sometimes the expertise is not solid, it's being constructed along the way. But mentoring is a hugely important process through which we enhance the expertise of individuals and therefore the profession. And as we enhance expertise, that allows us to develop the skill set and the understanding that we need to work in the roles that we take on as teachers to the very best of our ability and to meet the challenges inherent in each role. And clearly we know of the problem of teacher retention, and it isn't unique to England, but it is acute in England. One of the difficulties of the lack of teacher retention, or the numbers of teachers who leave early, is the lack of opportunity for those teachers to develop enough expertise to feel comfortable and confident in new roles, to then step into those new roles, to continue to develop that expertise, and to actually therefore build this community of experts. Every school is built of a community of experts. It could not function without. But if we wonder and worry about those who we lost along the way and the potential that they would have added, the capacity they could have added to our system, then I think those two things together, enhancing expertise and enabling the development of individuals in role, and also enabling the expansion of those roles so that they really meet the challenges head on, then we can think about how important it is that mentors work in that way. And I'm not necessarily going to speak about these in the order on the screen, and haven't actually even thought about the order in my head. So I'm now looking at what might feel like quite an odd phrase, generative accountability. What I mean by generative accountability is that, if we are working as professionals, then evidently we have to be accountable in our work. And there will be some days where we walk away from school, or for those of us in teacher education, walk away from our colleges, our universities, or our desktops if we're just sitting behind a screen all day, and question what we've done that day, wonder how impactful it was, worry about the mistakes we made. But actually, that's all part of normality. There are days when things work well, and there are days when things are more inevitably unsuccessful. What matters is that as we hold ourselves to account, and as we allow other people to hold us to account, we do so in such a way that is generative, that is in itself formative, that allows us to continue learning because we haven't had all of our confidence quickly undermined, because we haven't been sent into a corner and excluded from a role that we're really hoping to develop. So that generative accountability, I think, is something that we can enter into in an entirely humane and entirely supportive way through mentoring. And I think it needs to be there early. It needs to be something that as emerging professionals, we develop a sense of comfort with, as opposed to a fear of. So mentoring, I think, can create a safe space in which we are welcoming the accountability that being a professional demands. And that's not always the case, but it can certainly be an ambition and certainly be a thing that we work on in our schools, in our university provision. And we can think, how do we generate that capacity for generative accountability through the humane process of mentoring? If we don't generate that, then it can become very difficult to work in an environment with a feeling of being trusted. Because part of being trusted in a professional environment, one which throws so many challenges at individuals working in it, is the need to feel trusted. If we don't feel trusted, then we don't step outside of our comfort zone. If we don't feel trusted, then we don't lean towards the problems. If we don't feel trusted, then we hide the mistakes that we make. If we don't feel trusted, then we are less likely to join a conversation where problem solving is at the center and where we all acknowledge that we kind of need each other to co-construct solutions for a better outcome. So these things come together, and trust, we know from so many research projects into coaching, mentoring, professional learning and leadership, is a really critical component of our professional environment, but unfortunately is quite easily undermined. Without feeling that we're working in a situation in which we are trusted, it is very unlikely that we will feel we belong. And I think a really critical part of creating professional legacy through mentoring is that transition that we take people on from becoming a teacher to belonging in the profession, to feeling at home, to feeling welcomed, to feeling skilled enough, to feeling valued, to feeling that the contribution that we are making is fundamentally important, to the point where we can't quite imagine not making that contribution in the future. So mentoring, which helps to generate a sense of belonging and which sustains that sense of belonging, is critical. Moving to some of the other ideas on this slide. I first came across the word solidarity, as a word which I noticed way back, I guess it would have been the 80s, when the Polish political party emerged and was called Solidarity. And it was an unusual name for a political party, a political movement that became a party. But it seemed to capture the essence of the time. It seemed to demonstrate a set of values and beliefs that were utterly necessary to begin to transform a political system and beyond. And I guess it stuck with me. Maybe it was a time in my, adolescence when words took on significance. As you became aware of vocabulary, you became aware of meaning, things take on greater significance. And then I don't think I ever used the word solidarity until about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was fortunate enough to be attending a conference. It was probably an ESA conference. It was definitely in Cadiz. It was extraordinarily hot. It was in September. It was a frenzied conference, very busy city. And I remember sitting for about an hour and a half, 2 hours in a single symposium, and having chosen a symposium because I thought, if I can find this room and sit down and concentrate on a suite of connected papers, it will create a sense of calm amongst the chaos and heat of this conference. And as I sat through those papers, which were all about the theory of practice architecture, this word, solidarity, started to really resonate. And it never left me, that sense that as educators, our prime purpose is to create a sense of solidarity with others, is to understand others, is to support others, is to generate with others a values-based shared purpose, which we commit to, which we see through the hard times in, that sense of solidarity. And it is sometimes, it feels like a contradiction in our English education system, which is so driven on the surface, on the surface, by competition, by league tables, by always needing to feel that you're just that bit better, stronger, more capable than the provider next to you, that the kids that you're teaching as a teacher will do better than the kids did last year because your performance management depends on it. And I'm not going to start a huge argument with anybody about pros and cons of those sorts of systems. But if we lose the true nature of education, which is to serve the needs of all and to be part of a system which builds community, which builds up individual self-efficacy, self-esteem, which allows people to flourish in their life, then I worry that we undermine that shared purpose. And it sounds like a grand narrative, it genuinely is, but I think mentoring can be one of the places in our professional lives where we build solidarity, where we demonstrate solidarity. And I think it's a huge part of the legacy that we leave behind. I'm going to move just onto one other, so that's voice and inclusion. Oh, it's two things, isn't it? And they're two very big things, to be fair. But once again, I think mentoring, especially in the early career stages, is such a significant opportunity to give our voice to others, to allow their voices to be heard. It's a huge opportunity for conversation which is inclusive, and it allows us to imagine a profession which is as diverse as we need it to be, as multi-skilled and talented as we need it to be, as committed as we need it to be. Because if we can raise up the voices of those people who enter our profession with such hope and ambition, and allow those voices to contribute to the conversations that we have about what we do and why we do it, then I think we stand a better chance of holding on to the people who we most will need into the future. So I'm going to stop there, but I am going to just come back to that final, that thing that I wanted to remember, which is that I am really passionate about the fact that whilst we may not all have the designated title of mentor, that as a profession, we owe it to each other to be a mentoring profession. And that the work that we do in initial teacher education and through the early career framework and other provision is a really important part of that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's always lovely to listen to you. And I think some of the key highlights here for me is that teachers need to identify as teachers and mentors, and also thinking about solidarity and working together to a common purpose to help others to grow and develop. So that's been fantastic. And we have some questions obviously appearing, and we will touch on those in the discussion. So lovely. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that very thoughtful and thought-provoking reflection on the importance of mentoring and how we can create a legacy. Now, our next speaker is Derek Boyle, and Derek is the director of the Bromley Teacher Training Alliance, and he will tell us more about his role and also what he does. And his focus today is going to be on mentoring and coaching in school-based contexts, focusing on resilience and new skills required. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Derek to share his learning and reflections with us.
Good morning, colleagues. It's lovely and quite a privilege to be following up Rachel, because as you can see on the screen there, I'm actually a Collective Ed Fellow. So I'm one of Rachel's happy band of professionals, which are sort of spread across the world, and they are it's a good family of professionals to be working with, the discussion wide issues around mentoring and coaching. So I would heartily recommend, if you do get the opportunity, to join and find out about their work. So yeah, my name's Stuart Vaughan. I'm the skit director at Bromley Schools Collegiate. We are the original skit. We established the school centred initial teacher training model back in 1993. And since that time, we've trained about 1,700 teachers for mainly sort of Bromley and South East London. I've been in role now for a little over 7 years. Prior to that, so I trained as a physics teacher back in 1996, and I taught secondary science for 17 years across schools in Kent. So I've looking at the process of mentoring coaching from being both an in-school mentor, then all the way through now to running a provision which normally trains between 80 to 110 teachers every year. Okay, next slide, please. So when COVID hit for us in school, there were a number of immediate issues that we had to consider. We had some trainees that, because of illness or health conditions, they had a delayed start to the placement, but our trainees go out into placement right the way from the beginning of September. We had basically a 48-hour window in which we had to turn a whole load of systems on their head, and also provide ways in which we can bring that whole collegiate family with us through this major rapid change straight away. And one of the things we had to do was provide a calm and measured response. And because we were providing not only the mentoring support for our trainees, but also we were mentoring our in-school mentors and our senior mentors, subject leads, and all of our wide team. And we have a shared purpose, and that shared purpose we've identified very quickly was, how can we support the trainees which we had at the time to get ready for employment in September, in a world which none of us knew what it was going to look like. So it did give us a really good focus which we could all pull together towards. Main issues we had locally was the immediate impact for our trainees and our mentors, for those who had their own caring responsibilities, where we had mentors which weren't in school. They may have been looking after key worker children, etc. That was taking some of their attention and mental bandwidth away from the support of the trainees. So it was assisting our trainees to adjust to a new reality in the way in which they're going to have work. And one issue we had locally was access to testing, local lockdowns. And while all this was going on, we was also preparing for the new Core Common Framework, a new Ofsted inspection framework as well. There was a lot of things that we had to mentor our in-school mentors through at the time, because we had to change the way in which we were undertaking our formal assessment points as well for the trainees, and move to remote training, remote support for the mentors, and a Viva process instead of a face-to-face assessment as well. So there was a lot of things we had to juggle, but everything was sort of through that sort of recognizing that there were emotions running and people were very uncertain of what was going to be happening. So go to the next slide, please. So these were the main considerations which we had. And with the trainees that were in the middle of training for a job which wasn't going to look anything when they originally applied to us, anywhere up to sort of a year before, how do we help them retain the idea that they have that professional identity and self-agency as a teacher? Because there was a lot of things out of their control. The way in which we'd been training them to teach in the classroom, a lot of it had gone straight out the window. And so it was helping them to adapt on the fly, to provide remote learning, to provide support for their mentor as well, which their mentors trying to work out what they were going to be doing with their classes, and also supporting their trainee who was uncertain what's going to happen. And, it was one of the most trying times for some of our trainees was when members of their family were getting ill, and what they do, and they had that equal pull either way to their social and family responsibilities, and also to the responsibility they had for their children. And our trainees do see the children in their classes their children. We had real concern about making sure that our trainees had downtime, and also we radically looked at the way in which the paperwork systems and the administrative systems which he had for our mentors as well, to provide that opportunity for there's going to be a downtime. And so we had to say to the trainees, well, you need to identify a time when you are going to be taking a step back from your teacher training, and also to be able to give some space and mental bandwidth to your placement mentor as well, so that they learnt that little bit more to do with resilience as they were going through. And yeah, they come through it very well, and we were very proud of them going through. So next slide, please. So with any forced set of external pressures which is put on you, it gives you an opportunity to reshape the way which we were working. Our training programs, initially we were using Zoom quite a lot, but several of our colleagues had security concerns about Zoom and various other platforms, etc. So we made the decision to move over to Office 365 to allow for the work within school-based teams to continue. But also we used Zoom with some of our trainees, those who had exacerbated mental health concerns. We put in place some sort of tea and chat, and it was an opportunity for those who were struggling to be able to go, I am struggling, and then we could provide that support. Because one of the things we did say to them, if you are struggling, please tell us and we will be there. We won't be judgmental. We need to make sure you are supported, to make sure you've got those coping mechanisms for when you are a fully qualified teacher in September. And because we were looking at this was going to be a 12 to 18, maybe to 24 month period of adjustment and then readjustment for our trainees. We put a heightened emphasis on well-being and mental health. It's a common theme throughout our programs about social, emotional, mental health, not just of pupils and children we work with, but also of our trainees. And that common shared response to the new reality of teaching. We talked with the trainees and say, remember, your mentors are learning a new set of skills at the same time as you. And it gave an opportunity for the trainees to reflect upon their response to imposed external change as well, because the people they're working with, they didn't have the answers, and everyone was learners at the same time, which was quite a key thing, I think, and it made us stronger as an organisation. We signposted the trainees to the Educational Support Partnership, and because we have good links anyway with a lot of third sector organisations, we could draw upon a lot of external expertise. So next slide, please. So this example about the sort of the support bubbles which we put around each of our trainees. So in our secondary programme, for example, they have a senior mentor group. So each of their placement schools has a senior member of staff, normally an assistant head or a deputy head, who's responsible for all of the trainees within the school for that pastoral welfare. We have subject-specific leads as well for each of the subjects. And so there's another open layer of support there. And also the rest of the cohort. They very quickly adapted and utilised WhatsApp and various other online messaging systems in order to make sure that they were there for each other. And where we have these subject specific groups, the senior mentor groups, the cohort, etc., we also had a mirrored system also for the mentors as well. So there were other people, and we made sure that we prioritized getting back to mentors and members of our teams very, very quickly. We were responding within minutes of emails, encouraging people to ring us as well, because sometimes a 5-minute conversation, you can deal with a lot of issues. You can also get underneath those issues very quickly. And sometimes they like talking to a familiar voice as well, which was quite important because we couldn't work with them face to face in the same rooms, and that was quite hard for us as a central team as well. Okay, and we consider all of those overlapping groups as their own separate professional learning communities or communities of practice, and they're there to support each other professionally and personally as well. Next slide, please. So we put a great deal of emphasis on that this was a learning experience and it's going to develop their resilience. But what we put all the way through our training program, and also particularly in the response to COVID and for the mentors and the trainees, was they need to accept feelings of confusion and uncertainty, and also that the children are feeling anxious. We need to do everything we can to calm them down, because we need to recognise that we don't have all the answers, but because we've got life experience, we will be able to help them to navigate through it. Okay. Next slide, please. So things which we're going to be looking at the moment with our new cohort that's come through, where we've got different tiering of restrictions across the country as well. Most of our training's in South East London, but we have a cohort also down in East Sussex as well. And how can we support not only our trainees, but our mentors and also our employers that we work with to develop these working partnerships going forward? But for our cohort, which has just started, we've got to think, well, what are going to be the ongoing issues which they are going to be facing from September 2021? So it's one of the discussion and reflection points I'd like to raise with colleagues later on. And the last slide, please. So, in conclusion, this has given us a great opportunity to reshape the way in which we develop our workforce. That's not just the trainees we work with, but also with the mentors and the senior mentors and the systems which we work with. And it brought into sharp focus the way in which we need to continue with a paperwork light approach that we do, but we need to take the whole of our collegiate family, our whole of our learning community together with us, and to engage them meaningfully in terms of the way in which we work with that broader community, with the schools and the pupils that we work with. And mentor and coach in the formal and informal ways. Sometimes when somebody rings up and going, I'm having one of those days, and you let them offload and you use some of your coaching practice in order to help them towards finding a solution for themselves, because we work with an expert group of colleagues and they do know the answers. Sometimes it's just that little nudge to get them there. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Derek, and thanks for sharing your insights regarding your learning during the lockdown period. That's been really fascinating to see how many layers of support you've put in place, and it's also fascinating to learn how you are considering next steps forward and how you would want people to then continue to reflect and learn. And of course, there's those really pertinent research questions that you've given us to reflect on as well, which we can discuss a little later. So without further ado, we have our next speaker, Elizabeth White from the University of Hertfordshire, and she's going to talk to us about mentoring and coaching, working in partnership and induction. So over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Lizana. Delighted to be part of this event today. It's really lovely to be with you all. My role at the University of Hertfordshire is ITE Research and Mentor Development Lead. And so I'm going to focus more on what we've been doing this year regarding induction and supporting mentors. This beautiful photograph on the slide seems to me like a metaphor for us going through these strange days. There's a light in the distance that draws us forward, along an unknown and indistinct pathway, shrouded in mist, with the destination hidden from view. The trees lining the route have stood there for many years, guiding us and those before and after us along the route. What are these trees that have stood the test of time? Maybe they represent the values that we hold on to, that guide us in the decisions that we are making moment by moment and day by day. Perhaps they are the role models who inspire and encourage us, and the students who give us our sense of worth and purpose. We move forward because of them, purposefully and with hope, as we step out together, co-learning with those we are working with in these uncertain times. We know that we make a difference as we continue to support the professional learning and development of new and experienced teachers. And even better than that, we're on this path with each other, and how great to be a part of a network of professionals who continue, often still unrecognised, to prepare much needed teachers despite the challenges we have all faced. So let's be beacons of hope too, and to keep hope alive. Next slide, please. Okay, I'd like you to think about this question. What one word would you use to describe the kind of mentoring that is needed for students and early career teachers in this new normal? So I'm going to give you a moment to submit your word. So we have a word cloud. The larger the word, the more people I think are putting that word forward. So this is really a good way of seeing where we are at currently with our characterization of what kind of mentoring that we're looking for. Lovely, thank you. As our word cloud might still build, I would like to suggest a different word that I don't think anybody's put on yet, and that is the word purposeful. And that's what I'm going to focus on now. So that all that we do will be underpinned by really clear purposes and values, because I think that allows then for the flexibility to meet the rapid changes that we are facing in our context. Guy and Day's research in 2013 indicates that having strong beliefs about our core purposes and values, and having support from colleagues and leaders, or a combination of these two, are essential in contributing to the development of individual and collective resilience. So I'm advocating that we need to know clearly what we are doing, why we are doing it, and have strong relationships within our partnership so that we can do it. So I'm going to share with you what we're doing at UH, and our partnership vision for ITE encapsulates what we want to be doing and why, the things that we believe are valuable as a partnership. They're our core purposes and values. So in partnership, we work together to develop teachers with the confidence to have agency, to make professional judgments, and to enable the development and learning of all. To have a professional voice, to articulate how research has informed their practice and to contribute to new thinking and new ways of working. To have resilience, to respond innovatively to a changing educational landscape. And value social justice, to strive to ensure every child's learning and life chances are not limited by social or economic factors. So we worked hard in previous years to be able to develop that vision on the ground with any of the stakeholders in the partnership who wanted to contribute. And since we launched our vision, it has been constant work to raise the vision as part of everything, so that it's not just in the teaching of the students and their assessment, but it's in mentor development and partnership meetings that we are weaving in how are we focusing on our vision, and these are our core purposes and our values. We want everyone to be buying into it genuinely, not a tick box exercise. So now that we're learning to be even more agile and resilient, we're doing this by keep on going back to these same core purposes and values which have stood the test of time. And in preparing for the induction of our new cohort, our first question was, what are the key messages about our ethos and our vision for the student teachers? And how can we get these across effectively with the tools that we now have available, because induction shifted online? There was a need to let go of structures that have worked and that have been refined over many years. And we had to keep on asking, what is the best way now to meet the purpose? So through our preparation for induction this year, we tried to keep our purposes at the forefront of our thinking, to make our expectations realistic and workload sensitive, and working closely with our partnership. So these are 3 questions that we have tackled or are tackling and are going to be ongoing, I think. So the first question that we were asking was, what will we need to do differently now that we are mentoring students in a new context that we've never been in, using new skills that are not necessarily our expertise at all? This is a huge challenge to who we are as mentors and teacher educators. And the changes in our context will have an impact on our own professional identity as well as the way we work. We see this as a very positive time for mentoring, as we may be using new approaches for our own teaching and for the first time with our students alongside us. This provides an opportunity for genuine co-learning and co-creating, which will be professional learning and development for us as mentors and teachers, as well as for our students. So both mentors and students are bringing different knowledge and skills to the collaboration around the work in hand, bringing us onto a more level playing field, with both partners being valued for what they can bring to the table. But many of us find it really difficult to change our practice and to take our expert hat off and admit that we don't have all the answers, and no one's been this way before. So we need to be open and vulnerable. And this brings a real challenge in the affective domain. And we need to have a space somewhere that we can surface those feelings that we have and recognize that everyone's going through this. So we feel it's even more important for us now, which is something that reflects on what both previous speakers have said, that we have a really strong community of mentors and teacher educators, and that we buddy new mentors up with others so that we can look after our well-being. Our second question was, how do we actually support mentors to be vulnerable? What does that mean? So as teacher educators and mentors, we can be really tempted to give answers to questions, but that can trivialize other people's professional learning. So this current context can really help us to move beyond just giving answers to helping our students to develop professional approaches and to know how to create answers themselves for new challenges. So we have professional knowledge that we can bring, and we need to be able to articulate what we are bringing. And so we've kind of explored that in terms of the ability to explicitly model taking a reflective stance and an inquiry approach, and provoking and deepening thinking rather than providing solutions. So in these ways, we can be developing students who are resilient, independent, and professionally wise. As mentors, we can offer ourselves to listen and be open, vulnerable, and responsive. Our offering is bespoke for the professionals that we are working alongside. We can help people to connect, to network together, to support each other, and we can enable them to maintain some vulnerability and compassion towards their learners. Very much we're doing this as teacher educators. It's a layered approach where we are explicitly modeling with our mentors in their community, and we are supporting them to be able to listen and be vulnerable alongside and be compassionate with the students that they're working with. We can help our mentors to appreciate what they have to offer and to be able to articulate that. And our role in partnerships may well be one of encouragement and appreciation and explicitly recognizing the professional knowledge and skills that our mentors have, building them up. Third question, how do you support your mentors to tread one step at a time with the students through this new landscape, rather than grasping out for the scaffolding that we've used in the past? How many phone calls we've had about, so when are we going to do this and what's happened to that? Before the pandemic, we really were working ourselves into some kind of a frenzy of activity, trying to get to the end before we'd even started. We felt pressurized to jump through hoops in our performative world. And this hasn't been healthy or helpful approach. So in order to be realistic about workload and capacity during the pandemic for everyone's well-being, it's been vital to slow down and only go a step at a time. So we've been modeling that in our partnership by trying not to panic and to try and get everything into place for the whole program. Instead, we're keeping our values at the forefront of our minds and just taking a step at a time, saying we're only thinking about how we're going to get to Christmas, what are we going to do, what's important to have in place. And some things that we would have rushed to get in early on, we're laying off and helping people to really get embedded into what they can be doing in the classroom, or thinking about what it might mean if they're not going to be in the classroom. So the programme is more developmental for the sake of everyone's well-being, and because it's impossible to plan everything for an unknown future. And we hope that this will help our shift in thinking from doing things for or to others to doing things with others, so that we share joint ownership. Practically how we're doing this is we've streamlined our paperwork, so we've reduced the workload hugely. We have broadened our mentor development and support so that there's lots of different ways in, different formats, specific days, people can come for networking online together, a range of dates where mentors can drop in online and bring questions for one of the team. And we have a series of on-demand resources that can be dipped into as and when mentors feel that's what's right for them. We're trying to walk the path together as a partnership through little and often communication rather than heavy, long sessions, and with lots of mutual support and encouragement and opportunities to share our highs and lows. So going back to our metaphor, I wonder what trees are lining your pathway, guiding and inspiring you to go forward purposefully as you work alongside your partners on this untrodden way. So over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's always insightful to listen to everyone, and I love the metaphor of the trees. Lovely. The key word I heard was purposeful today, and also vulnerability. And it reminded me of the work of Brené Brown as well, where she talks about the fact that you have to be vulnerable to become brave, to have courage as well. And it seems to me that you have pulled all those threads together in your layered approach to support your partnership. So thanks for sharing that. I would like to invite our first three speakers then to join us in the discussion. We have some lovely questions being presented here as well. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to those. It's a little bit of a pacey session today to get us to think a bit more about this very important topic on how we support others. And the first question is from Tessa. She's asking Rachel about the following. How do you feel we can use the time and opportunity of huge change to produce a coherent plan to develop this crucial legacy?
Oh, just a small question. How can we, okay, I'm going to speak in ideal terms. I think every single institution and context is subtly different. So we can not ever easily provide a set of guidelines and instruction for somebody else to follow. But what we can always do is find our collective voice. So if we are able to tell the story of the significance of mentoring during these difficult times, to be able to celebrate the impact that our early career teachers are already having, partly on the basis of their, the support they were offered in these particularly difficult times as they finished their training year. If we are able to find those corners and spaces in which we sit down with each other and share what we're doing and acknowledge and appreciate that expertise that is being offered through mentoring into the system, then I think we can build a stronger collective belief that mentoring really matters. And I think that in the end, that's what will carry this forward, because if we believe strongly that mentoring matters, then we will look at the systems and structures that are put in place, whether that's on a local level or a national level, with a greater degree of hope and ambition. And also we'll scrutinise them to ensure that what we hope they will achieve, they genuinely are achieving, that what they haven't done is just add in another layer of significant bureaucracy and more checklists and hoops to jump through. So I think there's just something about a stance that we can take together that makes the most difference, really.
Lovely, thank you for sharing that. And then this is a question from Sonia. Derek, if you could take this one. How can we retain teachers who are identified as expert performers within their schools leaving teaching?
One of the ways which, thanks for that, Sonia. One of the things that we do is we encourage our trainees at the end when they finish with us, we'll say, right, in the next 3 years, we want you to be back as a mentor. And we have that expectation that they will come back and they will reinvest in by being mentors. It is referred locally that we have what's called the Bromley Mafia, where everybody within teaching within the borough of Bromley seems to know somebody who's been trained through the collegiate. The way which we retain our expert colleagues in a small way is we encourage head teachers to talent spot. If you've got somebody on your staff which has got a real passion for what it is, formative assessment or questioning technique or behaviour for learning or something, we encourage them to put them forward to be involved in the ITT programme. And it's always, there's quite a bit of kudos given by the trainees to people who've been through teacher training themselves reasonably recently, and people who've trained through our family of schools, and for them to come back. And when you say, well, this particular trainer 5 years ago was sat there as a trainee teacher, and we then get the feedback from the trainers that they enjoy working with the new trainees coming through. And it enables us to build networks. And when, for example, if the trainees are employed within a particular trust, they see the people that have trained them. And it is something which is helps to build those bonds between professionals, and it helps them to navigate that professional identity which is between them. And we also have a cross-borough CPD twilight, which we organise. So we have about 800 teachers from across our schools all come together once a year. And it gives an opportunity where people have trained with us or are currently training, all the way through to people who've done 30, 35 years in the profession, at whatever level they've got in terms of seniority. They all come together and work collegiately once a year, and you re-knit together those bonds, of those sort of family bonds between those communities of practice. And when you've got 80 maths teachers coming together, and it is like a family reunion, and it's keeping them interested. And if people have got particular research interest, we ask them to come back and talk to the trainees about it. What are they doing? So
great, thank you so much, Derek. And it seems like it's that sense of belonging that's really important, isn't it? And that sense of being part of the community. I have one more question for Elizabeth. This is from Dr. Nazima Hassan. And her question is, how do we ensure that holistic school cultures also support mentors and trainees to be vulnerable?
That's really interesting. Thank you. And that the question suggests that there's a sense that the partnership is a really challenging thing to have the impact in schools. That it suggests the separation, and I think that it is. Our focus has been on trying to be working together so that these ideas have been from things that we've been talking about as a partnership. So just as much the school professional mentors from the school that have been in on the conversations. So hopefully that it cascades across the schools. It's always a challenge, isn't it? Especially as a lot of schools are not working just with one partner and they have their own ethos and their own way of doing it. And I think it's just persistently working in the way that we have been working, long-term relationships that have built up that really help. But if anybody else has got some really good suggestions on how to do that, I know it's an issue, it's a challenge. Yeah.
It's the emphasis is relationships, isn't it? Really important. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then Rachel, a quick one for you. Is the work published anywhere that colleagues can reference?
Oh yes, that's a good question. Yeah, so one of the things that we do through Collective Ed is we publish working papers, and also we have a blog site within the Carnegie School of Education. But if you just Google Collective Ed Leeds, you will probably find us very easily, or go back to the slide with the website. And within the website, within the web page, there is a quick link to working papers. And currently we have about 13, 14 editions of working papers with an average of 15, 16 papers that are authored by mentors, by ITE leads, by researchers. And their focus is all to do with coaching, mentoring, and professional learning. And we know that they are well used nationally, internationally. And if you haven't come across them yet, you're bound to come across one or two papers there which speak to you really quickly. There are 2 editions, special editions on mentoring, but littered throughout all of the issues are papers from really expert contributors on mentoring. So I hope that they're useful.
Great, thank you so much. And then one final question to the whole panel. Is there any global mentoring program set for people across the nations? I'm currently teaching English in Indonesia, and it will be great to join the program. It is from Leola. Sorry, apologies for the pronunciation. Anything we know of that people can engage with internationally?
I personally signpost them to the work being done at Leeds Beckett personally, okay. But I'm just part of Collective Ed as well. So it's really good mentoring support there, and ways in which you can actually look at your own practice and reflect upon what you can take from the Collective Ed papers. And also you've then got the follow-up conversations you can have with fellows afterwards as well.
Right. And thank you, Eric. And then I'm going to put this one to anyone from the panel. How do we manage the expectations of the Early Careers Framework, which talks about mentors as experts, and yet all presenters so far have questioned the concept of mentors as experts? It's from Kate Hammer. Just a quick one to wrap up. We've got 1 minute.
Well, one of the bits that we're doing at the moment, we're providing a coaching program to our ITT mentors and trainees about how they can engage with the work of, say, Professor Robert Coe or Dan Losky and people like that in a bite-sized format, because some of them, by their own admission, it was decades since they did any educational theorist. And it's how you can actually bring them up to speed very, very quickly. And it's not just you need to read this book, but what does that mean for your practice in the classroom? And that's some of the synthesis work that we're doing internally at the moment, because we've identified this as a gap of confidence. They know their stuff, our mentors, but they don't know the language to frame that discussion. So that's what I
think it's also to do with how the Early Career Framework is written, and the assumption is where it says this is an expert, that it's the mentor all the time. And I think there's a much wider field of people than just the mentor. Too much expectation. If I was a mentor and read that as what I had to be, I wouldn't want to be a mentor anymore, because it sounds scary. And that we've really got to approach it together as partnerships with people from university, from different schools, you know, not just one school and one mentor trying to meet all those different agendas. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Super. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for this morning for part one. And we are now moving on without further ado to the part two, where we're listening to different voices in the education landscape, reimagining the support for teacher education. And our first speaker is Anne Palmer, and she's going to talk to us again about NQTs and early careers teachers and support that they need. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Lizana. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak with all of you. My name's Anne Palmer. I'm a person with extensive whole school school leadership experience. I've got a strong history of working with various partners. I'm also a fellow with the Chartered College of Teaching. At the moment, I run numerous projects, some directly linked to the focus on trainees and NQTs. I also run an international NQT program, which as an essential part of that offers the mentors bespoke training, and I'm a trained coach. If we go on to the first slide, effectively what I've tried to do is look at the system as it stands now, and look at the various gaps that I believe there are, and then I'll move on to propose some possible solutions. So if we could have the next slide, that would be great. I wholeheartedly believe that the role of the mentor is crucial. I've put 6 different areas here, but I also believe that when we look at this topic, we need to be very practical in our response, because there is an awful lot of literature out there which makes you know, really, really good reading. I think sometimes we have to look at the NQTs as they are and say effectively what we need them to do is to focus directly on what's happening in the classroom. This said, that I think that there needs to be an entitlement for the mentors, and I'm pleased to see that under the new framework that is party to it, but that will need some explanation and exploration around what that means. And I think Elizabeth touched on that really well in that last point, that we can't assume just anybody would want to be a mentor, particularly as the specifications are now clearer and more prescriptive than previously. So the 6 areas I'm going to briefly look at are identifying the mentor, and I've called them an assessor for a particular reason. The nature of the support that's being offered. Is a support academic or is it personal? Should it be both? Why is it important for it to be both? The longevity of the support, how long does that last? And yes, we've moved to 2 years, but actually we know that that's not the issue. It's that longer term trend of recruitment and retention that we need to embrace. The wider knowledge acquisition, the ability to receive feedback. And here I'm talking about, you know, we have our trainees, we have our NQTs coming through, but that feedback are general terms as, you know, there is an issue with workload, but actually if we were gathering the evidence on a more regular basis, the mentoring, the training programs around that mentoring could reflect that on a quicker basis, in order for those new in the profession to be successful. And the last area that I'll cover is really around the recognition of success. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So if we look at the first 3, I've talked about the identity of the mentor, but actually in the current model, they are in fact your assessor. And I wonder to some degree whether there is a conflict of interest, because whichever way we want to pitch this, the person that is taking you through those lessons, helping you to lesson plan, the person supervising you is the person that is writing those end reports. So you can't move away from the fact that your mentor determines your future. So do we need to have a system whereby the mentor, there are two types of mentor, one for the purely academic aspects and the other type which supports all those social things that goes around the demands of being within the profession. The skills of the assessor, we've seen the best and the worst, and in various places, mentors are simply, it's just assumed that they will become mentors because they are the line manager, and yet that support mechanism around what that role looks like hasn't been there. How are they chosen then is the big question, and assumptions that actually that personalities will complement each other. So your mentor is that person, but that might not be the person that will bring the best out in you. So that choice of assessor or mentor, I think, is absolutely crucial. The second point I want to make, which is around the nature of the support. We talk about deep diving straight into the lesson, but we know that without NQTs, early teachers are really enthusiastic, lots of excitement, but unless they can have support with the personal parts of their life. And I know we can say, well, teaching isn't about everything. Well, in fact, we know that once a teacher steps into the classroom, things that may have happened at home, things, their state of mind, all of those things will reflect in what happens in the classroom on that day. And we still see too many occasions where we hear NQT saying, I've had my first cry today. Are we the only profession where somebody has to cry? I ask myself. We shouldn't assume that this is going to be the case, and we need to be pulling back on things within schools and as mentors to make sure that every day is going to be a really great day, whichever way we can support to enable that to happen. Classes need to be taught, yes, but we know that the personal aspect of a teacher's life is important. If we look at the last section there, which is to do with the longevity of the support, at the end of that year, at the end of the training, there's the expression, yes, you've made it, well done. I've had some really good examples recently where training schools have actually followed their trainees into schools and said, look, we are still going to invest in you because we want you to stay in this profession. And I think that's absolutely marvelous. There's a void between the end of year one, but also, you finish year one, and the void is, what do you hear before that middle leadership course? So there's a period of time there where you should be building strength and capacity through to middle leadership, if that's what the person chooses to do. But I think within the system, there's a void between you finishing your NQT year and what you do through to middle leadership. Again, how long should mentoring last? I know it's down for 2 years at the moment. My proposal would be that actually goes on for much longer than that. So 2, 3, 4 years all the way through. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so very quickly, wider acquisition of knowledge. As a mentor, we prioritize the academic curriculum, and we know that there are other things that are added on, but these add-ons are the ones that make the school, things around pastoral care, the pastoral curriculum, effective safeguarding, working with parents, career education, even the role of governors. Some NQTs go through their whole life not knowing, actually, governors will appear in your classroom because, the head teacher has told you that's going to happen, but they don't know anything about the role of governors. So within my own program, some of the things I do is try and infill those bits of knowledge that just put things in perspective. perspective. My question is, how might we work to make those other things within a school fit more easily into the bigger scheme of things? Equally, are we using mentors that are interested in their own wider knowledge? That would be my second question, because some are placed in those roles, as I've said previously, but they have no interest in developing their own professional knowledge. The ability to receive feedback, I touched on that very early on, but for me, perhaps there's a way that we can have an automated system to explore those issues, that immediate issues that NQTs can forward centrally and have responses around CPD programs. And the last one that I'll mention is to do with the recognition of success. We know that there are fabulous NQTs out there. Wider recognition, how do we learn about that apart from word of mouth? So we need to elevate NQTs and early career teachers beyond Twitter, and I don't mean that in a facetious way. We know that there is some incredible work, and likewise with mentors, how are they going to be recognized? If we could move on to the next slide.
Sorry, Anne. Thank you so much. We'll have to sort of conclude with that, and we can always come back to this in the discussion. But thank you for sharing your fantastic expertise and fantastic thoughts, really, things we need to pick up on later on as well in future research regarding the continued development of NQTs as well as their mentors. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. So lovely, thank you. Our next speaker is Emma Jane Moulton, and I would like to welcome Emma Jane to the session. Without further ado, to share her learning and reflections in regards to the lockdown and then also post-lockdown to reimagine mentoring.
Thanks so much, Lizana. Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Emma Jane and I'm a member of academic staff from Cardiff University. I'm really delighted to have been asked to contribute today, and I'm drawing on a range of experiences, including having been a school leader and more recently co-director with Professor Caroline Daly on the Masters in Educational Practice in Wales. Now I work in a range of ways with some of the ITE partnerships providers across Wales, and of course with many schools and their staff. Before thinking about today's theme, I just want to take a little moment to show you the context that's currently taking place within Wales. Next slide, please. The Welsh Government has devolved responsibility for education in Wales, and we're currently undergoing significant and widespread reform. Wales has a national mission for education, and as part of that, the following things have been or are being reformed. We have new professional standards for teachers and leaders. We have a new national approach to professional learning, which includes the development of a new Wales-wide Masters. Initial teacher education has undergone significant reform in the last couple of years. We have a new National Academy for Education Leadership, and we have a forthcoming National School Improvement Resource, and there's a new national strategy for educational research and inquiry. And on top of all of that, if it wasn't enough, a new and ambitious curriculum for Wales is due to be rolled out for 2022. Next slide, please. It's within this Welsh context, and of course the current global pandemic, with all the uncertainties that it brings, that I considered the question for today. And I wondered, are we reimagining, or do we need to think about reprioritising and refocusing? I think what I mean by this is, should we be revisiting what we already know, but that might have become lost or faded in the busyness of responding to all of this change and uncertainty? The more I've thought about this, the more I wonder whether we should be thinking not only about those who need to be mentored, but the mentors themselves. And so many colleagues this morning already have talked along these lines. So in the next few slides, I want to think about, of course, what mentors need to consider with their mentees, but also, and certainly equally importantly, what we as teacher educators and initial teacher education providers need to think about for and with our mentors. Another way of thinking about it is imagining 3 concentric circles with the mentees nested in the centre, surrounded by the mentors and their schools, surrounded then by the teacher educators and or ITE partnerships. I have a series of themes I'd like to talk through. Next slide, please. Firstly, I want to think about professional learning community. and how and where we establish shared understandings, provide a safe learning environment and an environment that is mutual and reciprocal, that has plenty of opportunity for connection and is formed on relationship building. In the same way as I think it takes a school to grow a teacher, I think it takes a community such as this to help support and grow excellent mentors. As Rachel has already said this morning, we create each other in the profession. So for me, this is twofold. It's about thinking about how we create that learning opportunity and the learning community for mentors so that they together can support, enrich, and get good professional learning to enable them to be the brilliant mentors that they can and want to be for their mentees. Secondly, I think there's something really important about making and prioritising time, despite how busy we are. Little and often, regular check-ins, time that provides opportunities for dialogue, discussion, and the rehearsing or rehearsal of ideas. Derek has spoken about those kinds of opportunities in his context. Making time really helps establish trust. And for me, this is really important. Creating a space that is reassuring, supportive, and non-judgmental, and that encourages openness and honesty. Thinking about this from the point of view of the mentor is important. It is necessary for them to have the environment where they feel that they can talk about their concerns at this very unprecedented and unfamiliar time, where they can have a community who understands and has time to listen and to the situations they're facing. So I'd like to think about how we listen to, support, and mentor our mentors. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to think about having a mentor orientation in the same way as I would want mentors to have a teacher or mentee orientation. I want to think about how we meet the mentors where they are and not where we want them to be. How do we make sure they feel equipped to undertake the role that we've asked them to take on? In the same way as I would want mentors to support their mentees in thinking about their role that they undertake as practitioners. I also think that this is related to valuing diversity in the mentor community, in the same way as we would value diversity in the classroom. Mentors will be different. Mentors will approach things differently, and I think there's lots to learn from different approaches and ways of supporting NQTs or student teachers. We need to be sure that our expectations of mentors are realistic and manageable, achievable, and not yet another burden in a very difficult time. We have to ensure we're not tormenting, adding to increased demands that mentors are facing every day, in a very similar way to the way in which I think we would want mentors to make things manageable and not to torment mentees. I guess what I'm talking about here is how we model, how we as teacher educators and providers model the ways in which we want our mentors to work with their mentees. And not for 1 second am I saying that there's one way to do that. What I'm saying is that we need to model the values, the behaviours, the approaches, the care, and the valuing of difference towards our mentees in the way we would want them to adopt that with their own mentees. Next for me is learning together and thinking about and considering the essentials of mentor and mentee roles in this unfamiliar time. We need to learn together and think about that learning as being mutual, think about it being shared, and perhaps thinking about how we can embrace this uncertainty within which we're operating and get more comfortable with being uncomfortable, using it as an opportunity to think differently. Doing it together is much easier than doing it alone. We're all in this together, adapting and learning with and alongside each other, problem solving and tackling the challenges we are facing as teacher educators with mentors and as mentors with our mentees. Next slide, please. The final 3 themes. The first is about listening carefully, about listening but not fixing, about reflecting ideas back, checking for understanding. For me, this is about understanding where mentors and their mentees are coming from, understanding the experiences they're having, checking that we understand those really, really well, sense making. This is so important at the moment when we're asking mentors to adapt and undertake their roles in new and unfamiliar ways. How carefully we listen provides a very strong cue as to how carefully we want our mentors to listen. I also think there's no one way, no blueprint. And what this calls for is a deep and ongoing critical consideration and reflection, mentoring in the moment, being responsive from an informed perspective, thinking about particular contexts that teachers are working in, the children they're working with, the learning environments that they're situated within, and the broader school and community. We need to embrace diversity and accept that there isn't one way of being a mentor. Mentors, mentees, and their context in which they operate are unique. So mentoring approaches need to be similarly varied, bespoke, and adaptable. Finally, I want to talk about the value of questioning, of challenging norms and assumptions. Despite the challenging situation everyone is working within, we need to encourage disruption, to inquire, to seek to understand, and to resist notions of let's not rock the boat, or we've always done it this way, or I'm the expert and you're the novice. So in summing up, I've talked through a number of ideas that I think are more important than ever for mentoring. And I wonder whether we need to re-emphasize, revisit, reprioritize and refocus on the mentors. So I don't know if it's about reimagining. For me, especially at the moment, it's about how we nurture our mentors in order to support them to nurture and mentor and grow the teachers they work with. Slide 7, please. Thank you so much for listening. Diolch yn fawr iawn. In relation to the interactive element, if we've got time, I'd like to invite you to contribute a word or phrase to a word cloud. So please, when prompted, can you write down one that has resonated with you that you'll take away from this morning's session? Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. As we're saying, thank you to you. If colleagues could post a word, that'd be lovely. As I can share one word that resonated with me, diversity, but also then the importance of refocusing and the importance of developing our mentors and nurturing them. That's been a really thought-provoking speech and talk that I'm sure will stay with us for a long time. And then as you are sharing your thoughts on Emma's word cloud, I would like to then welcome the next speaker who would be sharing her experiences and reflections. Linda Bell, she's going to reflect on then her learning journey in terms of how to develop and support mentors. Thank you very much, Emma. Sorry, Linda, are you ready for us? Linda, if you could just unmute yourself.
Okay.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Lisanna. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here this morning. My name is Linda Bell and I'm speaking to you this morning from Glasgow in Scotland. Until just last week, I was a principal teacher in a large primary school in East Renfrewshire, and as of Monday, I'm going to be joining the School of Education at the University of the West of Scotland as a lecturer in primary initial teacher education. I'm also a part-time EdD student at the University of Strathclyde, and my main interest is in the work of teachers who mentor students when they're on placement in school. It's been amazing listening to everybody's contributions this morning, and so much has resonated with me. I'm going to be speaking this morning in a personal sense, but obviously from a Scottish perspective. I would suggest that learning to be a good mentor is a complex and demanding process because mentoring itself is a complex and demanding role. In the Scottish ITE system and in many others, a class teacher who mentors a student on placement acts in a multifaceted role as role model, pedagogical guru, listening ear and professional pathfinder. Furlong and Maynard have summed this up as a process whereby the mentor models the routines, rituals and recipes the student requires in order to act like a teacher, and works with them behind the scenes through collaborative planning and discussion to help develop the deeper pedagogical knowledge needed to underpin their practice. Mentor teachers may also function as gatekeepers to the profession, which can cause tension and conflict, as described by Lofthouse and Thomas, amongst others. Next slide, please. Thank you. All teachers should see themselves as teacher educators and be trained in mentoring. This is from the Donaldson Teaching Scotland's Future Report, which came out in 2010 and has had a tremendous influence on all of us in Scottish education for the last 10 years. That student and probationer teachers require mentoring to help them steer their courses through the unfamiliar territories of school environments and grow both professionally and personally is something I think we can all agree on. Becoming and being part of a school community, working alongside and learning from and with experienced colleagues are absolutely vital components in the education of beginning teachers. In Scotland, it has to be said that questions have been asked about consistency in the nature and quality of school experience for both student and probationer teachers. It's not perfect. I have mentored probationer teachers for a number of years, and when getting to know them, I always ask them about their student placement experience. I never fail to receive mixed replies. Much of what I hear is great and very reassuring, but every year I'm taken aback by stories of what I'll euphemistically call lack of preparedness by placement schools in fulfilling their responsibilities. This anecdotal evidence is borne out by research at national level. The Aspect Review of the Education Authority and University ITE partnership arrangements in 2015 found that although many students had very positive experience placements, there remain significant areas for improvement in the quality of support in schools, as well as in the arrangements for communication and for joint assessment. I think we need to remember, though, that for every student whose placement has not been a good experience, it might have been bad enough to make them feel excluded or unsupported or demotivated, as described, for example, in the work of David Johnson, Aberdeen University. There is a class teacher whose experience has also been in some way unsatisfactory. Of course, we don't excuse deliberately negligent, unprofessional or unkind behaviour, but in the absence of much research into how teachers come to assume mentoring roles, I'm going to suggest that they are quite often not given any choice or support or preparation, and that those deficits really do matter. Good or experienced teachers, even if they are very motivated to undertake the role, do not automatically make good mentors, and mentoring does not just happen spontaneously. In Scotland, we don't yet have widespread provision for formal mentor training for teachers. This has been highlighted recently in the work of Laurel Mackey at Stirling University, and indeed student teachers themselves have commented on it in an Aspect Review just a couple of years ago. We do currently have a longitudinal project which started in 2015 and is due to conclude in 2022. It's the Measuring Quality in Initial Teacher Education Study, otherwise known as the MQUITE for short. Amongst the questions it has raised to date has been that of how teacher mentors conceive of their role, given the very varied range of specific preparation undertaken. So clearly, I would say that not all teachers have actually been trained in mentoring as prescribed by Donaldson, and whether or not they see themselves as teacher educators, I would suggest is debatable. Next slide, please. As we know, in March, our students disappeared from their placements to re-emerge if they were PGDE or final year students in August, as probationer teachers taking up their guaranteed one-year posts in schools around the country. Teachers who were probationers in March found themselves suddenly deprived of full-term normal class teaching and had to quickly adapt to the world of virtual classrooms with some face-to-face work in the hub schools which remained open for certain children. In my school and local authority, I know that we kept going with the weekly mentoring meetings that are expected for all probationer teachers, albeit online, and we devised new programmes of professional learning to replace what could no longer take place in real life. We also undertook things like interview practice sessions because the probationers were job hunting at the time, and we had WhatsApp groups and Google Classrooms for probationers. However, mentoring is, of course, all about relationships, and useful as platforms like Teams and Zoom are, witness this very event, they can't ever be the same in terms of human interaction as being in a room with someone. As things stand right now in school in Scotland, mentoring meetings and other supports for probationer teachers have proceeded in socially distanced but otherwise relatively normal ways. Student teachers are about to go on placement into schools around Scotland, and we're prepared for that. We can't tell yet what sorts of interruptions to their experience and to the experience of our current probationers there will be. But in thinking about reimagining mentoring and coaching needs for student and probationer teachers as we go forward, I feel that in Scotland, we must make this time an opportunity to focus more clearly and honestly than we have done in the past on what we can change for the better. We talk a lot about students and probationers being school ready, but we should really be talking more about schools being student and probationer ready. Even before the pandemic struck, the MQuide project had identified as an area for improvement the need to shift the discourse to consider school mentors as school-based teacher educators, that is, members of the teacher educator profession, and to facilitate dialogue and shared professional learning between all of those involved in supporting student-teacher learning. A very recent paper, again from Laurel Mackey at Stirling, talks about the somewhat remote nature of partnerships between schools, local authorities and universities. But surely, to succeed in its aims, ITE requires committed expert participants in schools, universities and local authorities to work together, sharing common objectives. Which brings me to the quote I've chosen to head this slide. It's from a recent paper by Simone White in Australia called Teacher Educators for New Times, Defining an Important Educational Group. In it, she identifies 3 subgroups of teacher educator: university, school and community. Characteristics will obviously vary in relation to context, country and policy, but they are those people who contribute formally to the learning and development of teachers. Just using this terminology feels somewhat revolutionary, as in so much of the literature to date, teacher educator refers exclusively to university staff. Human Kennedy.
Sorry, Linda. If you could just consolidate, that would be really kind.
I'm in my very last bit, Lisanna. Human Kennedy have pointed out that our Scottish Partnership agenda has no specific budget, but nevertheless there are increased expectations on school staff regarding how students are supported and assessed. Mentor teachers, particularly those who work with students, operate too much in an almost invisible way. Some authors have referred to this as privatised work, without allocated time, support or recognition, when in fact they are all vital elements in what Leigh and Wenger call the generative process of producing their own future. To conclude, I feel that in Scotland, in the interests of our student and early career teachers, there is an imperative for the role of mentor teachers to be put on a far stronger professional footing. I don't pretend that these reimagining thoughts are original or innovative, and I know that what I'm suggesting will take time, effort and money. But I feel that now, more than ever, practitioners should be enabled to name and claim their identity, what Davey calls the valued professional self, and to have a professional voice that is heard and respected. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate that. Very insightful outline of the Scottish perspective there. And our next speaker is then Fiona King, who will be exploring her learning and experiences during lockdown and post-lockdown as well.
Thank you, Lisanna. Good morning, everybody, and I'm delighted to be asked to be here today. And just to give you a little background to myself, I currently work as a lecturer in Dublin City University, and I work with students in initial teacher education and postgraduate students. I was a primary teacher for 25 years before going into Department of Education Professional Development Service and then into higher education. So I'm a teacher at heart in my core. But what I want to talk about today is very much kind of my own perspectives and views on this. Next slide, please. Okay, so we know and we've heard people say today that mentoring is really important for those in initial teacher education, NQTs and early career teachers. In the Irish context, just since 2012-2013, that academic year, our undergraduate programs moved to 4-year undergraduate program, and our postgraduate entry route to teaching is a 2-year program. Unlike a lot of other systems, we have very limited number of ways of getting into teacher education, which has its advantages and I suppose challenges at the same time. So we have a number of key players, obviously, all with different roles. We have guidelines on school placement for those in initial teacher education from our Teaching Council of Ireland. Those guidelines came out in 2013. Next slide, please. Within those guidelines, we see the key roles. So we have principal and boards of management. So obviously they have a pivotal role in leading a whole school approach to school placement. Our mentor is kind of called cooperating teacher. So it's a teacher in the placement school who supports and guides the student teacher and is that point of contact between the HEI and the school. Now this is in the original guidelines. The HEI placement tutor is then the person engaged to support the student and mentor the student teachers and evaluate their practice while on placement. As we can see, mentoring is defined in these guidelines, and it's also acknowledged as being quite different process from that of mentoring newly qualified teachers. Next slide, please. As part of this, the recommendations from the Teaching Council were that the relationship between colleges and universities and schools would be promoted and that there would be regular communication, and as these partnerships develop, that there would be opportunities for reciprocal learning. I suppose there have been some challenges with that as time has gone on, and we'll see from research looking at the impact of this move in 2012 has shown. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of people have mentioned already that it's okay, it's one thing having a structure and a framework for mentoring, but we know that what's really important is the supports and the authentic partnerships that need to be in place. And within the Irish context, the Teaching Council did commission research which was carried out by members of University College Cork and my own university, Dublin City University, and which shows that the partnerships are between HEIs and schools are still mainly informal and ad hoc. They highlighted the importance for training for the cooperating teachers because this is a voluntary role. And more recently, Pazzi Salberg, who was involved initially in kind of promoting this move to a 4-year undergraduate degree, did a review of this, and in 2019 very much said the same, that there is a need for kind of training and more formalized role for the cooperating teachers and mentoring in the system. Hall et al. In that 2018 research carried out, commissioned by the Teaching Council, highlighted the importance of not only training and mentoring, but training in matters of research, inquiry, and innovative practices are needed to support the student teachers in this regard. And this is important, as we'll see in the next slide. Next slide, please. So when I think about reimagining mentoring during COVID, a couple of things come to mind. I have always felt that as part of working in teacher education, that, you know, we prepare the students, and at the end of their now 4-year undergraduate degree, we let them off, and there's lots of challenges that they meet. And for me, I always found that letting go kind of difficult, and kind of wanted to kind of support the teachers as they made that transition, even though that they have a formal induction program, but I still kind of felt it was something that was important. So it's an area of keen interest for me in research, but and I've kind of developed that. So some of the ideas that I'm going to talk to you about here are kind of based on that. But just to give you some background into other research that has been carried out in the Irish context, a colleague, Emer Holland in Dublin City University, has worked with cooperating teachers at post-primary level from different schools and supporting them in their mentoring role. So in that community of practice was herself as the HEI placement tutors, I think about 12 cooperating teachers, and looking at the community of practice. Now, that has been face-to-face, before COVID. And the focus within the community of practice was looking at the participatory action learning and action research, purely because Emer felt that the community of practice alone didn't suffice, that actually it's that bit that I was talking about of the challenges that the mentors have in context to enable them to support the teachers in the way that they want to. So participatory action learning, action research kind of focuses on that for the teachers and meets them where they're at, which is what Emma Jane talked about. So not where we want them to be, but actually kind of meets them head on. So they're able to identify what's important for them, how they need to be supported at this time so that they can support the student teachers. My vision for this, I suppose one of the challenges with this has always been, okay, this is possible for those that are close to the HEI that live in that area. But I suppose COVID has opened up opportunities in terms of we've seen what we can actually achieve by moving to online. So I suppose for me, I would like to see a move to online communities of practice that would have not only the HEI placement tutor and the cooperating teachers. I would like to see senior management or the principal or some member of senior management there, because as we know, that's where the supportive structures come from within schools. And again, I would think that PALAR would be a key role in that. And ideally going forward to even have student teachers involved in these COPs. Next slide, please.
Fiona, can we conclude with that one, please?
Sorry?
Can we conclude with your final slide?
Okay. The final slide then is looking at teachers in residence. So this is, sorry, can you just go back one slide for me? Yeah. So I've worked with teachers in residence who have left. So bringing back teachers who are a year or two out, they're early career teachers now. So they work with our initial teachers, student teachers, and supporting them in going out on school placement. And the feedback from the student teachers is really positive in terms of the teachers in residence coming in. And just to the very final slide there. Sorry, I suppose for me, what we need to consider is focusing on our early career teachers as boundary spanners, challenging the hegemonic practices where we see hierarchy, sometimes involved in mentoring, and trying to encourage people to get involved in brave research, and governments and funding to funding bodies to fund brave research in terms of what matters. If we want these partnerships to develop, then they do need to be funded. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fiona. And a really important point, the funding required to support us to do that deep research. I really appreciate your contribution today. The next person, last but not least, is Paul Campbell, sharing his perspectives, being all the way in Hong Kong. So welcome to the conversation, Paul.
Thank you very much, Lizanna, and thank you for the opportunity to in the event this evening or this morning as well. I have about 30 seconds, I think, for my contribution here. No, a bit more than that.
It's fine. You have a few more minutes.
Absolutely, but I'm sure we do finish on time. So my name is Paul Campbell. I'm a lead teacher at an international school here in Hong Kong. So I lead curriculum assessment and self-evaluation, as well as teaching and support teams in the upper school. Of course, in the context of Hong Kong, we've had quite a disrupted few years, actually. Schools closed for the first time round about now last year due to the civil unrest in Hong Kong. We have been closed since January because of COVID-19. We resumed classes on campus and in universities in June. And then we closed again at the start of the school year, beginning completely online. And we've now partially resumed learning on campus, but still only for half a day in many cases. So quite the challenging context, both for initial teaching education students, but also for early career teachers as well. It's been a complex one, but it's been one where we've been able to rise to the challenge too. Next slide, please. I think what's been really important throughout this process and reflecting on and considering the role of mentors, coaches, as well as the role of professional learning and development for all teachers and leaders across schools has been about the human development dimension. It's been about the emotional dimension to all of these things. I think what I've tried to do here is share some broad learning that could be applied in many contexts around the world. I think to start with, connected a lot with what Emma Jane talked about, that actually maybe this has not been a process of reimagining how we look at mentoring, coaching, or professional learning and development. This has been an opportunity to actually reveal what's important for each of these concepts in the domains of practice, in the domain of academia, and in policy making as well. So I think that actually the first thing that has been hugely important across contexts has been thinking about the nature of and the opportunities for critical self-evaluation to both understand the situation we're in, how we're responding, how those responses might need to change over time, and the consequences this is going to have in the future. It's about looking for opportunities where we can collaborate in how we design learning, whether that's supporting student teachers and early career teachers with the process of planning learning that's happening in classrooms, or perhaps it's about rethinking the systems and structures that are in place to personalise the professional learning and development that early career teachers or longer serving teaching leaders are able to engage in, both in a period of disruption, but in a time afterwards as well. How do we emphasise the priorities of equity and access and improvement in a time of disruption, but also in the future as well? And that's about the context of student learning, the context of professional learning too. And importantly, it's about how can we support particularly our new teachers, but also during times of disruption, how do we support that understanding of the complexity they're working within or that we're operating within? We're already working in very complex and demanding systems. Actually, when we do experience disruption like a pandemic or like civil unrest, it's even more important to be aware of what the influencing factors are on our professional roles and remits, how they interact with each other, and how they need to factor in the decision making that we're making, whether we're in a school community, in a university-based community, or within the wider education community within a public education provider. So I think ultimately what we need to now be thinking about is the mentoring, the coaching, the professional learning development that we do offer, whatever organisation we're in. We know that these things assume relational structures that may not necessarily exist, or actually they assume relational structures which have now changed significantly based on the situation that we're facing. It's about how do we ensure that we're agile enough and that actually we're able to take the time to self-evaluate, critically self-evaluate to ensure that our approach to mentoring, to coaching, or to professional learning reflects the changing context that we're working in, changing needs that our student teachers, early career teachers, that our communities are facing, and then how do we reflect that in practice as well. Next slide, please. And final slide was that. And so I think what's really important to highlight here, this is one way of conceptualizing the complex context we work in. We've got competing identities, capital as in the skills, knowledge, networks that people have to draw upon, the culture of the organizations you might be working with or within, the needs of the community that we're serving, the expectation of the stakeholders that are involved, and the power dynamics that are at play that influence how we do respond and how we can react and change. So what I want to end on are just 3 points and 2 questions. It's first of all that irrespective of the professional standards or capability frameworks we might have in place, we cannot underestimate the relational and the emotional dimensions to coaching, to mentoring, and to professional learning. Taking the time to invest in the systems, the structures, and the self-evaluation processes that enable us to both understand this and act on it are going to be important if we're going to learn from and embed important lessons from the pandemic. We need to think about the amazing practices that happen in many places in initial teacher education and with early career teachers, and think about how we can sustain and reflect the best elements of these with the practice of longer serving teachers and leaders throughout their career as well. I think finally what's really important is how we can start to think about new ways of perhaps the conceptual use of research with policymakers and the policy community. How could the research that has been done into professional learning more systematically and effectively influence the frameworks that policy communities are using to frame their understanding of the situation they're in and the action that we need to take as a result, both the philosophical commitment but also the practical commitment to that as well. So the 2 questions that I'm left with after reflecting on this very briefly and at high speed, which I apologise for, is then what do we now need to keep on asking ourselves is about how we enable the personal development and the practical development and organisational improvement as well. How do we enable that to be happening and to be happening in a sustained way as well? And actually, I think what has come out of this whole experience is time to reflect on, do we need greater conceptual clarity within the domains of policy and practice as to what we actually mean by mentoring, by coaching, and by professional collaboration. And in doing so, could that better impact and better influence how we sustain these effective practices in all of these domains on a much wider scale and for a much longer time? Apologies for the speed, but thank you again for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for being flexible and for talking us through that. And the final thought, really, that importance of conceptualization and how we define coaching and mentoring and what does that mean. We really appreciate that. Our events organizer was very kind and permitted us 5 extra minutes. So we have a bit more time. So for the panel, I have one question. And I want to encourage you to just reflect on this question each very quickly and briefly. The idea of mentors, this is from Sean Doyle, the idea of mentors being assessors is an uncomfortable one. Why do mentors so often have to be senior leaders in school? I thought it'd be really just interesting to hear what your thoughts are on that one. And then once we've explored that very briefly, we can then move into the plenary. Everyone okay with that? Paul, do you want to kick us off? I can see you.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really important point, is that I think someone mentioned earlier about the wide range of expertise that exists within a school community, and that's not just within the senior leadership team. So it's actually, I think, taking time within school communities. I think it goes back to the point before as well about clarity of the concept of what we mean by mentoring. That's not dependent on senior leadership role. What it's actually about is being able to identify the expertise that exists within the school community, how those connect with each other, and how actually maybe a more broader or connected approach to the mentoring process might involve not just the mentor themselves, the person they might be assessing, but those that also have expertise to relate to the needs of that individual early career teacher or student teacher and others that could support them on that learning process as well.
Super, thank you, Paul. Any thoughts, Fiona? Can't hear from Fiona. Linda, but sorry.
Sorry, Lizanne, I was muted.
That's great. No problem.
I think it's really important, as Paul said, that it depends on how we're defining mentor. Certainly in our context, it wouldn't necessarily have to be somebody from a senior leadership role. Somebody who is committed to that idea, and speaking more broadly of what Rachel said earlier about all teachers seeing themselves nearly as mentors. And I would think that if we want to establish that as a culture, we certainly need to move it away from just those that are involved in senior leadership roles.
Lovely, thank you. And Linda, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, speaking from a Scottish point of view, quite often it's a matter of managing time, and we have a kind of a system, tradition, whatever you want to call it, I think, whereby it's class teachers who mentor student teachers who are on placement because they're actually in the classroom with them, and it tends to be members of management teams who mentor probationer teachers who are with us for their guaranteed year, their induction year. But I think it's a really good question because, you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and it doesn't have to be like that. You know, if a class teacher wanted to develop their practice in that area by mentoring a probationer teacher, they should be able to, you know, get time in order to do that and support to do it as well.
Lovely, thank you. And then Emma-Jane and then Anne quickly, if you can, 30 seconds each.
Thanks, Susanna. I suppose one of the things that strikes me is the benefits I've had as a education professional from the notion of reverse mentoring. So some of my best mentoring experiences have been when I've worked as a senior leader with NQTs, and they've challenged my practice, and I've invited them and wanted to work with them in a way that they could help me think about improving systems and processes. So I think it's about how we position ourselves in those relationships and not being the expert and not being the senior leader, but being somebody who's in it together to learn collaboratively to try and make sense of experiences going on.
Lovely, thank you so much. That's a really interesting concept of reverse mentoring. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm sure we'll explore that more with research and all sorts in future. And finally, Anne, any thoughts?
I don't think you can replace the whole school lead because they are the gatekeepers, they're the school improvement factor, they're the person that ensures consistency across the practice. They're the ones that liaise with external partners. This said, many schools, most schools now work in families of schools. So finding a mentor that is not a senior leader within that family of schools should be a fairly easy thing to do.
Absolutely. So we can have a blended model, perhaps, where we have various colleagues involved. Lovely. Thank you for sharing. And we have many more questions. And what we can do as a group is we can answer these and ask our events team to share that with then the recording of the of today's event. And I really just want to thank everyone for the wonderful contributions. And then also in the plenary, I want to just emphasize today was very much a stimulus event with the view for us then to take this further into research opportunities and discussions throughout the year. And we would very much like to welcome you to get in touch with us, and you're welcome to email me directly if you wish, with some of these ideas that we can then explore further, because we are very keen to continue to reimagine or refocus what this means and how we can continue to support others to continue to grow. So it's been a very insightful, very thought-provoking day, rapid fire rounds, and we really enjoyed all the rich contributions. So thank you to everyone and thanks for attending. And we're hoping to continue to connect with you to have further conversations about the importance of mentoring and coaching as a way to support others to grow. Thank you very much, everyone.